Welcome, and thank you so much to everyone for joining us today for Teaching in Digital Tools, an ACMRS Roundtable. I'm Jeff Way, the Manager of Publishing Futures for ACMRS. I'm so excited to be kicking off our fall schedule of events with this roundtable, and I want to extend a huge thank you to ASU's Institute for Humanities Research for their generous funding of many of our 2020-2021 digital events. So many of us are about to or have already faced the first day of classes in an unprecedented fall semester that comes on the heels of one of the most challenging semesters in recent memory. For many, if not most, teaching last spring forced a series of unexpected changes that completely upended our classrooms as they suddenly became virtual. Teaching in the second half of the spring semester might be best described as triage, as teachers and students together continually navigated obstacle after obstacle to complete their classes. Though there has been a summer that seemed to both drag on forever and pass on in the blink of an eye in between to prepare for the fall semester, teachers across the country are still constantly adapting their teaching approaches in preparation for a semester that for many will be largely, if not completely, online. So how can we best prepare ourselves to teach in virtual spaces? What tools can help us achieve our goals? What sort of approaches and practices should we be using? And what ethical questions and models should we be exploring in our virtual classrooms? These are the questions taken up by the three amazing scholar teachers participating in this roundtable: Laura Turchi, Jonathan Burton, and Dorothy Kim. Unfortunately, in an ironic twist, our own digital tools failed us and corrupted our original recording of the event. However, all three of our speakers have graciously agreed to record their talks so we can still make these available online for those who were unable to attend the original event. I also encourage you to go check out the ACMRS events hashtag on Twitter for several live tweets from the event. As with all of our ACMRS events, I won't read our speakers' impressive and extensive biographies, but we have made them available on the ACMRS website for you to reference. The talks that follow are presented in the same order that they were in the original event, with Laura Turchi speaking first, Jonathan Burton second, and Dorothy Kim third. Finally, we hope that you'll join us for our next event, Shakespeare and Indigeneity, a dialogue with Natalie Diaz and Scott Stevens on Wednesday, September 30th. I also highly encourage you to check out and register for our other excellent events throughout the fall semester on the ACMRS website found under the Events tab. Thank you again to those of you for watching, and once more, thank you as well to our amazing speakers who went above and beyond recording the talk so we can make them available for you all here. And finally, best of luck to all of you continuing to teach in such extraordinary times.
Hello, I'm Laura Turchi coming to you from Houston, Texas. Thank you to ACMRS for this invitation to speak. I deeply respect and appreciate the work that this organization is doing to bridge scholarship and pedagogy. My title, Interactive Digital Shakespeare Editions, Changing Learners from Puzzled to Puzzling, is intentionally drawing attention to the question of teaching and the role of a teacher in the use of some specific digital tools. Who can help change learners from being puzzled or lost to being willing to puzzle out and make meaning from complex texts like Shakespeare plays? What does it take, and do the digital tools help? As an English language arts teacher-educator, what I'm looking for are digital tools that promote and support ambitious teaching in secondary school classrooms for current teachers as well as for future English teachers, perhaps your English majors, who need to be confident in the use of these tools. This is especially important in this time of pandemic, as emergency distance or sudden online instruction is becoming a routine. Synchronous time with students is becoming precious indeed. What is ambitious teaching? MacDonald et al. Write that it is a practice that attends to the learning of all students across ethnic, racial, class, and gender categories, and that aims to deepen students' understanding of ideas as well as their engagement in the solving of complex problems, rather than the more commonplace emphasis on activities and procedural talk. I'm sorry to say out loud what you know, which is that ambitious teaching continues to be a revolutionary idea even as it's based on social science research from the last century. And what is revolutionary should be painfully obvious. Ambitious teaching is inclusive. It is for all students, not just the ones that look like the teachers, or the ones that were smart enough to be born in the right zip code, or the ones that are even interested in the subject being taught. As a teacher-educator, I need digital tools and online resources that can surround and support ambitious Shakespeare teaching. This paper is a brief report on research I've been conducting primarily in high school classrooms on these interactive editions. Interactive might be a little bit redundant, but I want to emphasize the potential for meaning making using these tools. Each one offers the play text and a performance of it, video and/or audio, side by side. I'm going to offer a short tour of 3 powerful editions. I need to acknowledge at the same time how very fast these editions have evolved and all the new features that are on the platforms frequently. Interactive digital editions of Shakespeare plays make intuitive sense for people who struggle with complex texts. High school students I've observed using such digital Shakespeare editions make meaning by moving between the text and performance. They read, watch, listen, click on hyperlinked glosses and overlays of modern translations, and they read again. Students encounter the performance and the language together, which increases the clues that are available for meaning making. There's evidence that students who use these interactive digital Shakespeare editions to read a play are better prepared for ambitious teaching. They're less overwhelmed by the text. Teachers report that in subsequent classroom discussions and activities, students seem far less confused and more motivated to share their ideas about characters and plot, but also about interpretive choices of producers, directors, and performers. I need to note that these tools, these editions, were first developed for readers of Shakespeare plays, and they're only secondarily used, being expanded with teaching guides and materials, for instance, to support classroom practice and teachers. Performance Plus seeks to create a knowledgeable viewer or future audience member. The Stratford Festival of Ontario, Canada created Performance Plus, a free site which pairs the text and performance on a single e-page. The performance is from their Stratford on Film productions, which are available separately. The Performance Plus platform seems designed to educate as well as build the audience through revealing artistic choices. It is as if this production is one of many productions that one might come to know. The text is the script of the specific production, and a director's cut view is available. The text scrolls on the left, revealing any cuts along with the lines performed, which are highlighted as they are spoken. Individual highlighted words can be scrolled over for definitions. There is also an artistic insight link to interviews with actors about their approaches to characters. There is sometimes a visible audience, whose laughter often seems knowing and appreciative. The viewer experiences the video as if from the audience, although there are additional camera work that provides close-ups and some reaction shots. The costuming and staging reflect a full stage production, and the Performance Plus platform also offers a synopsis for each scene and character thumbnails as a reminder of who is who. Performance Plus provides links to a study toolkit with discussion questions and lesson plans. My Shakespeare. In My Shakespeare, the words matter most, and understanding is aided by a modern conceit, which is interviews with the characters themselves. Paradigm Education's My Shakespeare is a free website that began as a student support project by faculty at Stanford University. Their approach emphasizes reading while listening to the lines expertly and dramatically read. The audio is clearly, even slowly read, but with expression. There are separate videos that are embedded of selected lines that show the character speaking to the camera and acting, as well as providing a line reading. There are single word translations and superscripts that provide synonyms. Clickable icons open to some longer passages in modern translation, and a video performance is embedded in the text. Again, actors performing directly to the camera. There are word nerd links, which open to short video explanations of a phrase, such as save your reverence, or provide double entendre explanations that alert readers to interestingly suggestive words. My Shakespeare's most notable feature are the videos of character, not actor interviews, that cleverly summarize and effectively replay the scene. A modern-day interviewer recaps the opening action of the specific scene, and then the camera draws back to show actors in character. Characters react to each other as they do in the play. in the particular scene, sometimes to comedic effect, but also in rage or self-destruction as appropriate, much to the interviewer's visible discomfort, if not distress. Scripted with equal parts original and modern language, these interviews clarify what happens and how. Wordplay Shakespeare offers a transparent production, where to see the text acted out is to understand it. Wordplay Shakespeare is available through subscription on any device with a browser and internet connection. Created by the New Book Press LLC, Wordplay Shakespeare pairs the text with a full professional production filmed for the ebook. Through wordplay, the reader encounters the text as it's printed, but a borderless window on the right side of each page makes readers into simultaneous viewers of the performance. There is no scenery, and the costuming is subtle. The background is blank white with characters in mostly modern dress. Characters are sometimes in the scene but off screen, coming back into view only as they speak. Students can access tabs that offer page-by-page translations into Spanish, Mandarin, and modern English, as well as brief production notes and links to critical materials and clips from other performances. And there are glossaries of some vocabulary. Accompanying each act and scene, a synopsis highlights which character is which, and there are questions offered that invite the reader or viewer to ponder different themes. So with these tools, we need to talk about priorities. These are hard and complicated times for teachers and for classrooms, and we have to make decisions about what matters most to student meaning making. With these interactive digital editions, in the worst case, digital editions will gain too much authority. They will be perceived as teacher-proof, as an efficient way to cover Shakespeare, and as definitive artistic or critical interpretations, which is to say they'll be treated as textbooks and students told to go off and read Shakespeare, and that's the end of it. There's no classroom time. But again, with ambitious teaching, and in the best case, students who use these tools enter into discussion and writing with a much stronger sense of what happened to whom and why. Students have increased power to puzzle over the range of choices and decisions that are being made by artists, and they can recognize the competing visions of interpretation. And students have opportunities and can feel empowered to re-story, to interpret and present the works themselves in much the ways the digital editions have done. Also, our students are Gen Z, and they'll use the tools however they want. So, for instance, this is an example of how one student got Hamlet this last spring. Her teacher told me that her students, in studying it, would open My Shakespeare in one window to follow the text for the glosses, and then use Performance Plus for the video, scrolling, moving around, using the tools in whatever way made sense to them. So that will happen. But as we think about the ambitious teaching part, then we can think about ways that these digital Shakespeare editions can lead to less coverage of the play and more in-depth look at different scenes. Fewer cold or unprepared first readings, more intentional performance practices. Less teacher as authority on what the text means, and more teacher to student and student to student collaborative meaning making. Thanks.
The term digital tools tends to signal novelty and innovation, but I want to foreground some of the continuities that are going to impact our students' learning this year. Unarmed Black people continue to be murdered. Refugees in the United States are criminalized and separated from their families. Black and Hispanic teens are 6 times more likely to attend a high-poverty school than their white peers. And then there's COVID-19. I want to try today to wedge further open the spaces that admit light, possibility, and uprising. Where I'm interested in using digital tools to these ends, I will not proselytize for more and new digital tools. After all, digital tools are no less biased or regressive than the people who code them. We might consider how Zoom, for example, shuts down students' ability to connect with their peers and find the kind of solidarity that Beverly Daniel Tatum describes in her landmark study, Why do all the black kids sit together in the cafeteria? Equity and inclusion are not boosted when we add tech challenges to the historical challenges facing our students. If we want our classes to be inclusive, we'll begin with learning goals that advance student ambitions and with the question, can I achieve this goal with a more creative use of a digital tool that my students are already using? As a teacher, I want to take my cues from the pioneers in culturally responsive teaching like Gloria Ladson-Billings, Geneva Gay, Django Paris, and Zaretta Hammond, but also from the TikTok teens and K-pop stans who are already changing their world. What are the digital tools these students are already using? Our students are already using Blackboard, Canvas, or Moodle. If my LMS looks like this, I'm confirming for my students each time they visit everything they think they know about Shakespeare. Shakespeare is old. Shakespeare is white. Shakespeare is unchanging. Shakespeare is not for me. If, however, the landing page of my LMS changes weekly, my students can be prompted to think differently. Shakespeare is surprising. Shakespeare isn't what I thought it was. Shakespeare might be for me. Our students are already using PDFs. But when students in the white space of an early British literature course come across names like Ian Smith, Jane Degenhardt, or Dennis Britton, their default is to imagine a white scholar. In her recent talk for the National Humanities Center, Kim Hall challenged her audience, what are you doing to make Shakespeare more accessible, to free him from being white property? One place to start is by copying and pasting images of scholars of color onto their articles before you upload them to your LMS. Citation without identity is not enough. Our students are already creating and sharing memes on their social media accounts. They can use the same meme generators to repurpose a line or phrase of their own choosing from a text that you are reading, pairing it with a picture from the news, from campus, or from their community. Our students are already using simple video creation and editing apps on their phones. Invite them to produce a short video where their own reading of a passage plays behind a series of contemporary images or video clips that relocate those lines in a contemporary setting or issue. Here's how one of my students chose to reclaim and destabilize the words of Shakespeare's Prospero.
Horrid slave, which any prince of goodness wilt not take, being capable of all ill, I pitied thee, took pains to make thee speak, taught thee each hour one thing or other, when thou didst not, savage, know thine own meaning, but wouldst gabble like a thing most brutish, I endowed thy purposes with words that made them know. But thy vile race, though thou didst learn, had that in it which good natures could not abide to be with. Therefore wouldst thou deservedly confined into this rock, who hadst deserved more than a prison. You taught me language, and my profit on it is I know how to curse. The red plague rid you for learning me, your language. Abhorrent.
Our students are already using Zoom and periodically toggling between video on or off. They can use the same technology to create unrecorded breakout rooms, a dumb show performance, where students with their video turned off read a short scene, while those with the video turned on mime actions and employ simple props found around their homes, a light bulb, a kitchen knife, a COVID mask. Because they are already using YouTube, they can find inspiration at The Show Must Go On. Or, because they are already using TikTok, they have a great model for how to resist the speeches they find troubling. Our students may be using other digital tools unfamiliar to us. Create prompts that free them to connect your class to the world using whatever means of expression they like. What these 6 suggestions share in common is that they shift the cognitive load from teacher to student by maximizing the knowledge that students already have. Just last week, Carol Anderson reminded us that How we do the business of knowledge production is by valuing what others bring. But if you need an earworm to keep you in this mindset, look no further than the song written by Arthur Ross and Leon Ware for a young Michael Jackson. I want to be where you are, anywhere you are, everywhere you are. The practice of validating and leveraging student assets and funds of knowledge, being anywhere they are, was a crucial plank in the pedagogical architecture of the Qualities of Mercy project, the collaborative video project that asked students on 14 campuses in the spring of 2019 to render local a scene from The Merchant of Venice and harness it to the particular concerns of their own communities. When I've told the story of this project in the past, I've often noted that it was inspired by Playing for Change, a nonprofit organization that raises money for music and arts programs through the virtual collaboration of musicians around the world. The videos produced by Playing for Change are often astonishing because they reimagine songs in ways that celebrate local musical styles while also drawing connections between musicians who might not otherwise see themselves as part of a shared community. Something analogous happened through the Qualities of Mercy project. So, for example, my students created a specifically Angelino counter-narrative to Merchant by undermining Portia's chauvinism in Act 1, Scene 2, with the sights, sounds, and people of Latinx LA. Their pride in claiming Shakespeare for their own purposes was only enhanced when the playlist went live and they discovered their voices in harmony with compatriots in Texas, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, amplified by peers in Georgia, Mississippi, and Illinois. But why exactly did it work? And can we reproduce its successes in less ambitious and more quotidian projects? Kathy Davidson reminds us, you cannot counter structural inequality with goodwill. You have to structure equality. So I've spent some time reverse engineering the project in order to identify precisely what abolitionist and pedagogical structures made the Qualities of Mercy project emancipatory. The Qualities of Mercy project activated students because it began with seeing students' diversity as a strength. The project invited them to collaborate, leverage knowledge of and from their own communities, and become makers of meaning as they solve problems like, how can we speak back to the racism in Shakespeare's play? What is the version of Los Angeles, or Topeka, or Bellingham that most resembles Venice? Or what does it mean to have a queer Latinx man playing Portia? And if the summative product here is not a conventional academic essay, students who are decoding an exchange between Nerissa and Portia so that it can be transferred to a new setting via a new medium of expression are not only learning to mobilize the methods, resources, and terminology of our field, they are learning to read critically both the word and the world. Earlier this summer, in their webinar on teaching anti-racism through Shakespeare, Laura Turchi and Ayanna Thompson discussed beginning a Shakespeare unit with the question, is Shakespeare a monument that should be torn down? I want to close by building on this suggestion in ways that take aboard the prompts on your screen. The monuments unit of my Shakespeare class will not only begin with Ayanna and Laura's question, I'll also ask my students to read the Black artist Hank Willis Thomas's essay, What Should Our Monuments of the Future Look Like? And I'll ask my students to create with simple household items physical memorials in response to Titus Andronicus. Instead of writing a standard expository essay, I'll ask them to both write and record either a proposal or dedicatory address for their monuments. These are genres they can see in the world and imagine returning to when their undergraduate careers are done. And finally, when I come to assess their work, I'll allow them to choose between rubrics that weigh variously the artistic, rhetorical, and elocutionary aspects of the assignment. There are, after all, more ways than one to argue successfully for an inclusive culture. In a vital webinar from earlier this summer, now posted on the Folger Library's YouTube channel, Neda Medizada reminded us that it's not enough to put more Black and Indigenous people of color on our syllabi. We need to help our students develop new anti-racist reading skills. These are the skills that can also heighten the salience of our discipline and make apparent the value of the humanities. To achieve this goal doesn't require new tech. It requires instead cross-pollinating the digital tools our students are already using with active learning, culturally responsive pedagogy, and universal design. And finally, let's share our best, most inclusive assignment prompts, especially with our untenured colleagues. You're all invited to contact me for mine or to collaborate with me on something new. I look forward to working with you.
This talk, Digital Tools, Anti-Racism, and COP Pedagogy, will try to address our current threefold pedagogical reckonings: the white supremacist issues in our pre-modern pedagogy, in digital tools, and in how we teach. But first, some digital historiography, so we understand what we are doing when we are teaching online using digital tools. I am a settler of color, a product of American empire, the Cold War, and chain migration. The internet, is a site of settler colonialism and transatlantic chattel slavery. You don't have to take my word for it, but you can look at the decades of work of digital media scholars, including Anna Everett, Lisa Nakamura, Jesse Daniels, and Audrey Waters. Historically, the early architects of cyberspace always imagined the internet as an extension of U.S. manifest destiny, a frontier for freedom. If you read the documentary history and the manifestos, biographies, and information about the early Silicon Valley architects of the internet, you can figure out that they are basically hardcore libertarians. For example, you can look at the Electronic Frontier Foundation and the manifesto of its founder, John Perry Barlow. He writes, quote, "We are creating a world that all may enter without privilege or prejudice accorded by race, economic power, military force, or station of birth. Our identities have no bodies, so unlike you, we cannot obtain order by physical coercion." Unquote. This idea of a colorblind, bodiless digital frontier of freedom is a frame out of the digital world we deal with now. Daniels, Nakamura, and other scholars have debunked this myth that the internet is free of racism, colorblind, and are free of actually gendered, race, differently able bodies who also identify with different sexualities. Daniel explains that Silicon Valley CEOs and engineers have mined this ethos while developing the third-party platforms on which we move through our daily social, commercial, and academic transactions. They are invested in this raceless and disembodied internet that is imagined as a frontier utopia. In other words, the digital is an extension of the American West. It's an expression of American manifest destiny. In addition, as the internet is based on the centrality of coding in a monolingual English and American framework, it thus participates in the narrative of American exceptionalism, the digital Jeremiah on the Hill. From these terms, we know it only spells out further settler colonial genocide, stolen land turned into white property, and unending epistemic and devastating erasure of indigenous peoples and cultures. What further compounds this is the fact that digital structures are deeply racist and anti-Black. Embedded in these digital structures lies the architecture of U.S. chattel slavery. In her 2002 article, "The Revolution Will Be Digitized, Afrocentricity in the Digital Public Sphere," Anna Everett describes the embedded North American chattel slavery manifest in turning on her personal computer. She writes, "In powering up my PC, I am confronted with DOS-based text that gives me pause. Before access to the MMX technology powering my system is granted, I am alerted to this opening textual coding: PRI, master disk, PRI, slave disk, second, master, second, slave. Programmed here is a virtual hierarchy organizing my computer software operations. My access to the cyber frontier indeed is predicated upon a digitally configured master-slave relationship." Structural, violent, anti-Black organization continued into the controversy surrounding the language of standard computer programs, including Python, or even the frameouts of one of the biggest open-source archive tools, GitHub. It was only in the last 2 years that Python finally removed the master-slave language from its computing language. GitHub only began discussing this in the aftermath of the Black Lives Matter protests for George Floyd in Minnesota. Work on an anti-racist and anti-fascist pre-modern digital critical pedagogy, you must understand the history of this digital space and the way its world is structured. You have to, in fact, then gain critical digital racial literacy. You have to understand that you must also teach your students about this, because without this skill and critical eye, you will then be upholding the white supremacist, violent, what I would call cop pedagogy structures of this world. So I want to turn to a couple of different pedagogical examples. But first, the ethos of our semester and the year has to think about pandemic trauma-informed pedagogy. This should be our guide with our students, which is about community building and ethics of care. I also want to point out that we are all part of the academic industrial complex, often linked to the nonprofit industrial complex and the military industrial complex. We are embedded in these institutions of American empire that harm many communities. We are complicit. We have to reckon with that, and so do our students, and figure out what we must do. We must figure out how to push back and dismantle, whether this be in the style of Harney and Moten's Undercommons, Jessica Marie Johnson's electronic marronage. We are also often stuck in frames that are beyond our control, like the institutional LMS, institutional Zoom, or Google Mail, institutional mandates about using certain digital platforms, tools, programs. But within those constraints, we must do what we can to steal, disrupt, stop, push, prod, destroy, neglect in the name of anti-racism and anti-fascism. In critiques of the edtech world, people like Jeffrey Morrow and Audrey Waters have discussed the cop shit happening in the development and deployment of educational technology. This is about the surveillance and compliance techniques that link directly to ideas of education as a form of government surveillance and settler colonial compliance. I would like to take this further because of the emergency shift to digital learning that happened in the spring. So many online pandemic pedagogy forums, I have seen many people become hyper-focalized on all the various digital tools usually offered by third-party companies. Pearson, your LMS, Zoom, etc., as a savior for your online pedagogy emergency. Digital tools, particularly organized and run by neoliberal Silicon Valley companies, are not pedagogy. They are also the opposite of anti-racist and anti-fascist. Google any of your educational tech tools and you will come up with a slew of articles. Articles will discuss how Zoom has no privacy protocols and will use all video for their research and sell off the images of you and your students to companies for money, or that your LMS will surveil your students and you and sell off any behavior. Ditto for Turnitin, same for the biometric scanners and proctoring software of EdTech that want to scan students' eye movements to see if they are paying attention. All of this is about making you, your materials, your students into research subjects for tech companies to make money that are often intertwined with the surveillance state. Last example is a form of biometric surveillance. You can read Simone Brown's excellent book, Dark Matters, to understand the deep anti-Black and racist history of bureaucratic and documentary surveillance. You can also look at Ruha Benjamin's recent work, Race After Technology, to understand that digital systems help reify white supremacy from its earliest histories. If you regularly make choices about one textbook or edition over another because we don't want to hand over money to textbook giants like Pearson or prefer to buy from Bookshop, or a list of Black bookstores over Amazon who is developing tech with the US military and helps ICE, then you can gain the skills to do a little research to make decisions about our educational tech. If you can make a call for your students about books and classroom materials with this in mind, you should also be able to do this with EdTech software so that we do not fall into the contours of cop pedagogy. If the history of the police is the history of both the U.S. military killing indigenous communities, occupied territory, and the history of white supremacist groups who try to catch enslaved men and women who are seeking their freedom, then what are you doing to continue to support and buy into cop pedagogy? Learn to teach your students a critical digital pedagogy lens with these platforms and tools. You do it with books, textbooks, lab equipment. Finally, in relationship to digital tools and critical pedagogy now, how do you work on anti-racist and anti-fascist pedagogical methods? First, you need to consider the critical pedagogy conversations in this area. Do you think that an exercise, a tool, digital or otherwise, a digital tool, whether this be a mapping tool, a video game, etc., immediately confers anti-racist and anti-fascist pedagogy to you? In the same way you analyze your textbooks, your assignments, your very classroom spaces, down to the organization of the desks and how it confers power, you must do the same with your methods. For example, let's talk about games. Because you decide to use a game, digital or in real life, or role-playing, does not mean that you're doing anti-racist or anti-fascist pedagogy. RTTP is a project based on a very specific premise, that having students role-play history is a good pedagogical tool. But for what students? Every RTTP has a published book with rules and directions in its series. Let us look and examine the information about their unit on the 1835 Cherokee removal. We can discuss this description, but I'm interested in its structure and its directions. Quote, students participate in active learning when they are a part of the game. Each student receives a game book which outlines the historical context, game premise, central debates, rules, and readings. Students take charge of their own learning by assuming roles in a game they will want to win. They must adhere to the beliefs and worldview of their historical figure. but they are not limited by a script. Directions require that students, however they identify, adhere to the beliefs and worldview of their historical figure, and they need to do this to win. Thus, role-playing without critical evaluation about the structures, constraints, and methods means you are fine with making Black, Indigenous, people of color students witness genocidal trauma, if not actually have to play possibly the people who have dehumanized them to the point of genocide. The K-12 set know that this is already a bad idea because dozens of incidents of recreating Thanksgiving and the race is terrible, and also the U.S. trade in chattel slavery and who gets to choose to be the enslaved men and women have made it to mainstream news and been called out for terrible pedagogy. So why do college instructors think gamifying the past is somehow good pedagogy? What exactly does inflicting massive genocide mean when you have set it up as winning a game? Game and media studies scholars actually work on this and do research and write critique, but pre-modernists seem blithely unwilling to address the mediums and platforms of their pedagogy to understand the harm that is happening. In regards to video games, it is incredibly difficult to decolonize a video game, even if you imagine you can make a video game an educational tool. This is because, as Jody Bird has rightly pointed out, the video game structure requires that you always acquire and conquer a territory. There is no way to return the land back to indigenous communities. The digital has already been rigged as a manifest destiny violent settler colonial space. So these are the structural white supremacist constraints people must think about as they set up their classes. Yes, I can give you a list of various tools one can use in different kinds of classes, but the thing you really want to do in relationship to anti-racist critical digital pedagogy is to teach your students how to evaluate digital structures, tools, pedagogical methods, and what that means in dismantling white supremacy.